Well, it was very clear that there was something brewing in Crimea. There were reports and pictures of what appeared to be Russian soldiers in the area of Crimea who seemed to be growing in number and who seemed to be surrounding some pretty important installations in Crimea. So we were sent back to continue the coverage of this, and within days of us actually arriving, the place was changing very, very quickly.
The message here is decidedly anti-Putin. That poster there says, "Putin, protect me from you." That one says, "Putin, hands off of my people."
So we decided to take the drive from Crimea all the way to Donetsk. And I've seen a lot of borders in my life, and I'd never seen one like this one. There were a lot of armed men in balaclavas of various types of camouflage and varying degrees of anger and hostility.
The border less than 50 kilometers in that direction. They don't have a lot in numbers or in resources, but it's at least an attempt at a show of force.
It was actually really surreal because when we were talking amongst ourselves and whether they would let us film or not, and I was actually the naysayer. Well, I don't think they're going to let us film them. They're at the border of Crimea. But we went out and asked, and sure enough, they said, "Please go ahead." And we took some pictures of them and then looked across the road and saw this stage being set up. And so we went to investigate what was going on there, and it turned out that it was a number of Ukrainians, young Ukrainian people who worked at a radio station who considered themselves activists, and they had come to set up what we started calling Crimea Palooza. One thing I've seen actually both in the Middle East and in Russia and Ukraine is that people will understand English and can speak English. Like we met a Russian politician who was very open about, who spoke French fluently and knew English very well, but he insisted on speaking Russian, just as many Arab politicians do, because they wanted to make sure that their words were not misconstrued. What did you think of what Mr. Putin said today? He said that there were no Russian soldiers on Crimean ground.
Your colleagues saw how well equipped, how armed they are, says Yuliy Mamshur. For a self-defense regiment, it's too much, he says.
They wanted to make sure that they were speaking very accurately and specifically, and so even though they may speak English, they prefer to speak in their mother tongue so that there's no ambiguity. I do come across that quite a bit. One day we actually went to visit one of the municipal buildings that had been taken over by a number of young men in balaclavas, and we thought we'd go in and see if they'd let us film them. So we did.
Despite the mistrust, there seems to be a real willingness to tell their side of the story today. So they've let us in here behind the barricades at the regional headquarters to tell us this, that they're not exactly separatists. They want a Ukraine that will protect their interests.
And surprisingly, they were okay with that. So I went right up to one of them with my iPhone, and I was up to his face trying to take a picture, and I took it and he was fine. He had his hands behind his back. And later I was amused to see that when you zoomed into the picture, you could actually see that behind the mask he was smiling for my picture, which I thought was quite bizarre. You kind of let down your guard a little bit because these guys were being friendly to us and they were letting us take a picture and letting the staff come and go. And just as I was starting to kind of relax for a minute, one of the men who was wearing a balaclava dropped his handgun, and it kicked it by mistake and it skidded right across the lobby. I saw it go from one end of the lobby to the other, and it stopped me cold because it reminded me that as militarized as this conflict was getting, that a lot of these guys didn't know how to handle a gun, and just how dangerous that is. Every time we came up to a checkpoint, we didn't know quite what to expect. It really depended on the mood of the day and what violence had erupted the night before. And we had the chance to see something I'd never seen, which is a group of men putting a checkpoint together.
We're just a few kilometers outside of Slavyansk on the road, and we've run into these men who are building a checkpoint. It was just down this road that incident happened yesterday, a disputed incident in which at least 2 people were killed. This road, or this highway, was just a series of progressively more menacing looking checkpoints, and the men were more menacing. It was essentially every one of them was a huge pile of tires. Not sure where you get so many tires, and lots of bats and pieces of wood and fires sometimes in the evenings, and lots of questions. It was extremely difficult to verify information, but what I learned on that trip is the old saying that in conflict, truth is the first casualty, is that you can't know what's happening on the ground until you have someone there. So I really felt the importance of us actually being there and being the eyes and ears of our audience, because we were able to verify or to unverify information that was being reported and repeated over and over around the world.